Hello, everybody, and welcome to Stay Live. My special guest today is the author of Sideways, Mr. Rex Pickett.
Hi, Thitia. How you doing?
I'm good. And listen, Rex, how did you begin your writing career?
Whoa, that's a big question. First of all, I wouldn't necessarily call it a career because it's taken me a long time to even be able to give it that designation. I was just writing. When I was 17 years old, I started reading a lot. I grew up in San Diego, which was a surf culture, and I don't know, I just discovered books, and I started writing like a lot of writers back then. Probably not today, but a lot of writers back then started writing poetry. And
Yeah.
and then I went, I wrote a lot of poetry, and then after 2 years of writing poetry, I actually self-published a couple of books of poetry and handed them out to friends. And then I remember one day I about 1,000 pages of poetry because everything was on a typewriter back then, and I walked it to a trash can and I threw it in the trash can. I said, I'm not writing poetry anymore. So maybe that's when I started.
And listen, back in the 80s, you have been an indie writer and director with features like From
Right.
Hollywood to Deadwood and California Without End. How was that experience for you?
Well, I did make two independent feature films. I went to UCSD and I made a couple of short films there. Actually, I made a 70-minute film, kind of an experimental movie. And then I got married, and my ex-wife, who went on to direct an Oscar-winning short and now teaches at NYU, we made feature films, but they were in the analog days. It was real film, and it wasn't like today. And it was 8 years out of my life. The first film was sold to German TV. It was made for $60,000, and it was kind of a bleak movie. And the second film was bigger. It was about $500,000. They were both long road movies. The second film was a 4,000-mile road journey, went all the way from Los Angeles to South Dakota and back. We sold it to Island Pictures. They butchered it. They released it, and that was kind of the end of my career, 8 years. But I learned a lot about writing from making movies. You learn a lot about screenwriting.
And what did you learn?
Well, when you get into post-production, on my first film, I was the only editor. This is a feature-length film. This is not digital for those of you who remember it. This is strips of film and whatever. And I was in the editing room without an assistant editor for 2 years putting that film together. You learn what are wasted moments. And a lot of, when we talk about writing, people think of me as a novelist, but I've mostly been a screenwriter and a filmmaker, and I bring a lot of that to my novel writing. In fact, the rap on me in the publishing world is my novels read too much like screenplays, which is, by the way, that's a negative thing for them. And I don't think that's necessarily true, but you learn a lot about cutting, about compression, about what works, what doesn't work when I'm writing a screenplay. You don't always have somebody. I'll give you a concrete example. You don't have somebody just walking into a room, and then you don't always begin and end a scene. I like to, and you learn that in post-production on a film.
I see. In the mid-90s, you wrote the mystery novel La Purisima. What was the idea which brought you to write that?
Well, after my second feature film, From Hollywood to Deadwood, failed at the box office, limited release. I went through a divorce. My mother had a stroke, and that was a whole thing. And I just started leaving LA and getting back into golf, which was kind of an early passion of mine in my youth. And there's a great golf course up in the setting of Sideways country. So this is kind of going to bleed over into that. And it's called La Purisima, and there was nobody up there. And I thought to myself in writing a novel that maybe I could separate myself from all the hundreds of thousands of people writing screenplays, because there are fewer people writing novels. And so I wrote a mystery novel about a guy like me at that time, 30-something burned out screenwriter who's depressed and basically wants to kill himself. And he meets a semi-retired older private investigator on a golf course, and it leads into a whole mystery. It got me. I had no agent at the time. My agent had died of AIDS. I was really nowhere in my life, totally nowhere. It got me a really good literary agent, and we went out with it, and 100 rejection letters later, we didn't sell it. But thus that became Miles' the guy who can't publish his novel. That was really me who couldn't publish La Purisima, my mystery novel. In fact, if La Purisima had been published, there never would have been a Sideways, because when they buy a mystery novel, the traditional publishing world, they will buy the rest of the series of the characters. They will contract you for the next at least 2 more novels. So there wouldn't have been a Sideways. So really the failure of La Purisima, my mystery novel, laid the foundation for Sideways.
Well, it was better that it did go like this then.
Well, right. Yeah, you don't know it at the time. Trust me, I loved to have sold La Purisima at the time. I was pretty broke. So, but yeah, in retrospect, you're right.
And I was fascinated by the reading of My Life on Spec, which is the real story behind the writing of Sideways. What did inspire you to write Two Guys on Wine, then called Sideways? And how did you find the courage to metabolize and then transpose your inner path?
Well, like I said, I was totally broke. And my mother had a stroke, and I don't know, it was a really tough time for me. And I was in my 40s now, early 40s or whatever, and I was only a writer. There wasn't anything else I could do that I was, really trained to be. And you just keep writing. But now I had an agent. I had a publishing agent who believed in me. And in fact, the publishing agent had come to Los Angeles to be at the then powerful Endeavor agency. It's now William Morris Endeavor, as a book to film agent. And I mention that because that also was providential. So I just kept writing. So to me, I'd been going up to the setting of Sideways. I was playing golf, but I discovered that it was the wine world. And I'm Jack and Sideways. I'd go to the Hitching Post and eat my dinner. And I would do that about once or twice a month. It was a way of getting away. And out of that was kind of born the idea for Two Guys on a Wine Tasting Tour. Actually, I started bringing friends up there, and one of it was a close friend of mine who was very much like the Jack character, and we were going from tasting room to tasting room, having fun and laughing. And he said, "Rex, you got to write this as a novel." And so he said, "You got to write this as a screenplay." And so I went home and wrote it as a screenplay, but it didn't work. I didn't show it to anybody. It just didn't work. Then I was going to tastings here in Santa Monica, where I live, which is right in LA. And on Saturday from 3 to 5 o'clock at a little wine store, there was a little group of people, and I wrote a story about that tasting, but I wrote it in first person from the standpoint of a character named Miles. And when I got to the end of it, it's a Saturday afternoon tasting that sort of turns, kind of deteriorates into a brawl, basically. And when it got to the end, I said, "Oh my God, this could be the prologue to the screenplay Two Guys on Wine." And then I wrote the novel in 9 weeks from there.
Then something positive happened meanwhile. The AFI short written by you, My Mother Dreams, The Satan Disciples in New York, won several awards, including an Oscar for Best Live Action Short. Which was your reaction to that?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a long story. I mean, I was in New York in the early 90s. My then ex-wife, but we've stayed really good friends, had taken a development job, and I got one of the writing jobs in this development company. I was in New York, and I'd never really been in New York. I'm from Southern California, and I was living across the street from the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. And it was kind of frightening to me in a lot of ways in the East Village. And so I wrote a short script in like 3 days, just as an exercise. So after her thing ended with the development company, she went to the American Film Institute, the AFI, to reinvent herself as a director. Remember, she produced both of my feature films in the 80s. And I wrote all her first year pieces. She was one of very few directors to get to come into second year to do a thesis film. We pulled that script on My Mother Dreams, The Hells Angels in New York, but the Hells Angels have a copyright on their name, so we had to change it to Satan's Disciples, although they ended up helping her. And she made it. She started eligible for consideration. You have to win film festivals, and she won a lot. And then we won the Oscar. I mean, it was a huge moment. I mean, I wasn't at the Oscars that time, but she was there with her new husband, and her mom. But I was at a party, and it was a pretty low moment. The 90s was a tough decade for me, and pretty huge thing when they call your name and Kate Blanchett and Jude Law. hand a gold statuette to somebody. Yeah, a lot of people don't understand the emotion in that. And I blogged about this, but, Barbara and I, my ex-wife, we spent 10 years making 2 films together. So there was a lot of, to see her 10 years after those 10 years suddenly be standing up in front of millions with the Oscar, it's a pretty huge moment. It's a real validation of what you set out to do in life, which was to make films.
Talking about people in our lives, sometimes we rely too much on others' people's opinion. Do you think it might be necessary to free ourselves from those strings attached to get our confidence back?
Are you talking about something specifically?
Well, I'm talking about when your ex-wife Barbara didn't like very much Sideways in the beginning.
Oh, right. Well, I initially gave it to my agent, who to be at Endeavor, and he loved it, absolutely loved it. So he validated it, and so I showed it to Barbara and a couple of other women too. And honestly, she hates me telling this story, but she told me to burn it. She told me to burn the novel. She said it would destroy your career, and I said, Barbara, I don't have a career. But and my agent wanted to go out with it, but in every screenplay went through Barbara, that I did. She was the one who was going to produce them. And so I really valued her opinion. Even 8 years after our divorce, I really valued her opinion. And because I'd been validated by my agent, I thought, oh, she'd love it. And boy, I almost didn't do any. I wasn't going to burn it, but I was pretty close. I disappeared for 3 days. I wouldn't even return my agent's calls. Then she came over to the house. She felt really bad, and she was going to help me fix the novel because it was such a mess. And she had all these markings up, and I'm listening to her, and I'm thinking, God, I got to rewrite. And she got to the scene in the movie, which is taken verbatim from the book, where Miles has to go back in and steal the wallet from that obese couple who are having nasty sex, and the guy chases him out the door, and she had every page with a big X. Every page. Get rid of, get rid of. Alexander Payne had not read the novel. It took a year for him to read it, and that's a long story in itself. And he told me after he read it, he goes, I was just so afraid that this was going to turn formulaic and whatever. But when I got to that scene where they went in and took that wallet, that's when I knew I was going to make this movie. I always tell Barbara that, because I almost took it out. My agent said, no, don't take it out, Rex. That's one of the funniest scenes in the book. She wanted me to get rid of it. After wanting to burn it. Look, we're really close. I'm going to probably write a screenplay for her next couple months if all these things work out. And, but there comes a point when you have to believe in yourself or believe in other people, because writers, a lot of times, if you're very successful or famous, everybody kowtows to you and tells you how wonderful you are, and that can be a bad thing. On the other hand, in my case, I was so broke or whatever, I'd almost listen to anybody and what they were saying. If somebody's saying, I'll buy it, but change this, okay, sure, no problem, I'll do that. It's a very tough place to be. Being successful is probably better because you can call the shots, but when you're not, people will twist and turn you in so many different ways. And I listened to my agent. I didn't listen to Barbara, and the rest is history.
And thank God for us, you didn't listen to her.
Honestly, that I was very close to not sending the novel out. She really, and she's not a bad person. She's got great film and literary taste, but I was convinced the novel was a complete piece of shit. You have to understand, I didn't really believe it was necessarily going to be a movie. I just wanted it to be a novel. And actually, in all fairness to Barbara, in terms of the publishing industry, she was right. The publishing industry hated Sideways. On La Purisima, I got rejected, but they were actually pretty nice rejection letters. Their main problem was how to market it, because it was a guy's mystery and women read mystery. That's just a fact. 90% of all mysteries, genre fiction, are read by women. That's just a fact. And they didn't know how to market a thing about two guys. Sideways, the rejection letters on Sideways, because we went out to both the film world and the publishing world with it both. They were nasty. They were so nasty. My publishing agent, I now had a new one. He pulled the book after, I think, 15 rejections. He pulled it. And then when Alexander read it, which is a long story, and said it was going to be his next movie, we did a deal initially with Artisan Entertainment, and it was front page Daily Variety Hollywood Reporter News. Payne goes sideways. My publishing agent was so excited he went back out with the book, and they still rejected it. Nasty rejection. Front page news, it's going to be a $10 million movie. So I don't know what to tell you.
How difficult was the process to get Sideways published and then produced as a movie?
Well, it's, as you know from reading, I highly recommend people go to stage32.com and stage 32 the number, because it's a 6-part, piece, and it's the forward to the hardcover of Sideways. It's a long story, and, beginning back when I was in the 90s and writing La Purisima and then finally writing Sideways, it took a year for Alexander Payne to read it after the unpublished novel, was submitted to him. My agent had a nervous breakdown in the middle of that and left the business. When Alexander's agent called, it just came out of the blue. I was ready just to drive out of town. It was all over, I thought. And then they did a deal with Artisan Entertainment, still couldn't get the novel published. But then Alexander decided to go off and make About Schmidt. He was going to make Sideways before About Schmidt. And I went, oh no. Another 2 years of waiting, all of which you read in that article. It's in pretty intimate chronological detail, And then he finally came back to Sideways, which was really good because now he had more power. Artisan Entertainment was in trouble, and we did a deal with Fox Searchlight, which was a way better place to be because it's a wonderful, specialty division of a major studio. The people there are really great, and and it was a long haul. Years. And then finally, to have it be in the hands of Alexander Payne, who faithfully adapted the novel. They made some changes, but not many. And to make such a wonderful film, to win so many awards. Honestly, it was more of a relief than anything else. That finally somebody had recognized me, or finally got done right and got recognized, because film, so many factors are involved in a film ever getting greenlit. There are so many bad films, and you wonder, how did that get made? And how, and we usually know the reason why. You usually can pinpoint it. And I will bet you there are a lot of really good screenplays out there, maybe not thousands, that never got made for whatever reason, So I got lucky in many ways. But I think everyone who writes maybe will get lucky at some point and meet the right people, but you've also got to have the goods too. So.
And how did you feel when Sideways became a huge success and won many awards? How did Rex Pickett deal with success?
Well, not well, really. It was success in the wine world, and so wine festivals wanted me, huge book signings, and, wine here, wine there. I'm the Pinot guy. I'm Miles, and all this other stuff. And, it just, when you've gone through 10 years of destitution and deprivation, and it's not, that might be funny if you're in your 20s and you can look back on it fondly, but not when you're in your 40s. It just suddenly, I just was celebrating. I wasn't making really good decisions. I wasn't monetizing. I hate to use that word, but I wasn't really monetizing the success in the way that I've learned to now. And I guess you could say I got caught up in excess, for a couple of years, and then I just left it. I just said, no, I don't want it anymore, because everybody wants you for something when you're in that position. And initially it feels great when you've spent years alone, whatever. The love is unbelievable. I still get it to this day. It's wonderful, but I have to find a way to control it and not let myself go to it, because people want to use you not so much because of you, it's what they can get from you, whatever it might be. And, you just have to be really circumspect of success. I think it's a cliche, but it's probably harder than failure, I think.
The no Merlot scene in Sideways has become very popular in people's mainstream talking. What were you thinking when you were writing that?
Well, this is the number one question and the number one inscription on all copies of Vertical, the Sideways sequel. Well, when I was writing the novel, the Merlot scene outside the restaurant, Jack is going in. Basically, he's arranged this big dinner. He's excited. He's going to cheat on his fiancée. He's going to seal the deal, according to Miles. And so when they get, Miles is really, there's a scene outside the restaurant. It's much longer in the novel. And actually we're doing the Sideways play in April, and that scene is much longer in the play. And Miles is basically trying to, he's trying to sabotage this dinner is what he's really doing. And bear in mind, these guys are pretty drunk. So, he's like giving Jack a lot of shit is basically what's happening there. And just, he's getting Jack really, really, really worried. And Jack, in fact, Jack even says to him, I think, don't sabotage me, if they order Merlot, we're going to drink Merlot, and Miles says, no, but he's kind of drunk in there. And when he says it, the Merlot per se, it's really, about to cheat on his fiance, which is going to compromise Miles. There's a complicated thing going on in that scene. And although I will say that Merlot had, by the late 90s when I wrote it, 99, Merlot had really become a grape that was mass farmed, overproduced. It had become a cheap quaff. And within people who knew about wine, bear in mind, I was now meeting people who knew about wine. To like Merlot was sort of tantamount to being a Philistine or having pedestrian taste. So it was common knowledge, but I didn't know when I wrote the novel that the scene would make it in the movie, that the line would even make it in the movie, that Paul Giamatti would utter it with such venom, and then that it would have the you don't know that when you write a line like that,
Maybe everyone can feel like Miles at least once in this life. Is Miles Rex not only a real man, but an icon of the euphoria-dysphoria of our times?
Miles is written in first person from the standpoint of me, as is the sequel, Vertical. They're both very, very personal. They're fictional. I didn't live the things that Miles and Jack live in Sideways or in Vertical, but emotionally, they're very true to who I was. I was a failed writer like Miles. I wasn't a school teacher, but he's not a school teacher in the novel. But so they changed a few things. I probably did stagger out of the hitching post with a few too many wines under my belt. I certainly spent a lot of time up there. I did have golfers hit their golf ball into me, and I hit the golf ball back at them. A lot of things. I don't know, Miles has become something much greater in a way, and maybe in Vertical too. People really tap into that character because he's so human and so real. It's funny, Thitia, I just got on Twitter about 4 months ago. People have been telling me to do this for a long time, and I've built a lot of followers, and I tweet these very honest, raw writing tips and aphorisms. But then I wouldn't even call them tips. They're really raw and honest in my experience, kind of how I'm talking to you. And I've gotten so much wonderful feedback and love, at Rex Pickett. Just go. And I have so much fun with it, and people write me whatever. But I think Miles, I'm getting to a point here, and me, Rex, I speak kind of from an honest place, and sometimes it steps on people's toes. I think my ex-wife didn't like Sideways because it was, and so well, she just didn't want me to be that personal in a way. And of course, some of the things Miles says about his ex-wife in Sideways probably didn't sit well with her, but we won't go there because I know this is a PG-13 show. But that's how I've been. I was trying to, in the 70s, 80s, I was trying to be writing like Beckett and Kafka, and I wasn't Beckett and Kafka. And I think after I had a stroke in the early 90s, I wrote a really realistic and honest and emotional screenplay about that experience, and I got great response to it. It wasn't made, but it ultimately formed the content of Vertical. And from that point on, I've decided I'm going to only be open and honest and in my writing. I'm going to create real characters. And I think that's what people, I don't know if that answers your question or if I digress, but that was the key to my so-called success. It was writing from a very personal place, but finding a way to make it entertaining. I was a pretty depressed guy when I wrote Sideways, as you can see from Miles. But if I can make it funny, I can sell depression. If it was just about a mopey, depressive guy who goes up to the San Ynez Valley and goes wine tasting, gets drunk every night, we wouldn't have much of a movie. Yeah, I found myself in that place. I didn't want to be in that place, and I found myself there. And instead of like crawling or putting a gun to my head, which I probably should have done, I tried to alchemize it into gold. I tried to take the raw, or as the alchemists used to say, the prima materia, the first material, the raw material of my life, and tried to transform it into something other than, and thus was born the novel Sideways. It becoming a movie was just a very, very lucky thing that it becoming the movie that it became, could have imagined. But, however, and this is to all the writers and filmmakers out there, I think the one thing that Alexander Payne had the power to make what he wanted, so that was key. What he responded to was what we've just been talking about, was the raw personal honesty, but the way it was kind of balanced with comedy. It's a comedy. I get that from a lot of people. It gets transgressive at some points. It gets a little over the top in some points, but then it pulls back. It pulls back and it becomes very human. And people, to this day, Thitia, that film came out over 7 years ago, and when people find out I wrote Sideways, it was like it was yesterday for them. Part of that is because I think they don't make films like that much, really, On the other hand, if people go to Stage 32 and read that long piece, they'll see that there was a lot more to that movie. Some guy didn't just write a screenplay and it just suddenly became a movie. I mean, I poured 10 years of my life into that Miles character. And Alexander Payne honored that,
And let me say that it takes a lot of courage to do that.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, that's true. And I'll tell you where the courage comes from. I can parse this for you a little bit. Is when you write from that personal place, if it doesn't work, it can come across really narcissistic, really solipsistic, and that's really embarrassing. At that point, you'd much rather have tried to write some film about aliens who land on the planet, because if that doesn't work, at least you just wrote a thing about aliens. But to put yourself out there and not have it work, and bear in mind, Sideways initially didn't work, Thitia. This has over 100 vitriolic rejection letters from the publishing industry. They hated it. In 3 rounds of submissions, even when they knew it was going to be a movie, they hated it, So that's not easy, because you put yourself out there personally to be rejected. Then to have it flip-flop and to be validated, that may be the greatest joy, because they're not only saying, we love your movie, they're kind of saying, we love you, Rex. Thanks for giving us that. You know what I mean? And that's, I guess, maybe you say to yourself, or I did, it was worth all the suffering.
I was reading on your website the story about your parents, and your mothers especially. Would you like to tell us about the connection between your mother, The Road Back, and your new novel, Vertical?
Okay, I'll try to be brief. You've really done your research. That's good. Well, my mother had, after my dad died, and that's another long story, but my mother had a massive stroke in 1990. And I was in London, of all places. I was the last writer on Alien 3 with David Fincher. It's a long story, and we don't go down that road. But and when I got the phone call that she'd had a massive stroke, and anyway, so from London, and she was in the hospital for 3 months in a wheelchair. Totally, she'd become a different person. My younger brother took her back home, and again, long story, and in 2 years, basically took all the family's money, all of her savings. I had to come in and assume control of her care. Called The Road Back, and it's about a young music video director based on David Fincher, a little bit, whose mother has a stroke, and he ends up in a series of circumstances on the road with her to Wisconsin. Much admired, option 5 years, never made. It was a very personal thing I wrote. Park that. And Sideways hit. Everybody wanted something from me. My publishing agent wanted me to write a book. I didn't know what the next book was going to be. And he read The Road Back screenplay. I said, I don't want to novelize it. He pushed, he pulled my arm, and we did a deal with Knopf, Random House. And by the way, I'm not going to go on about my thing with Knopf right now, because it turns out I'm going to be blogging about it on the Huffington Post. I just found this out yesterday in a blog. Yeah, because it's going to be really great, and I'm going to go into what happened. But long story short, that novelization didn't work. I took the story of the son and I made him Miles, and thus conceived Vertical. And now Vertical it's 7 years later. Miles is now a successful author. It's flip-flopped. His mother's had a stroke, like my mom had in real life, and in the screenplay The Road Back, and in the novel that I had now abandoned. And, he gets offered to be, as I was, the master of ceremonies at the 3-day bacchanal called the International Pinot Noir celebration in the Great Willamette Valley, Oregon. His mother is in a retirement home or an assisted living facility and wants to be with her sister in Wisconsin. So Miles hatches this harebrained scheme. He leases a handicap-equipped ramp van. Jack is now divorced, has a kid, and is sort of on the skids with a drinking problem. He piles in Jack and his problem and his bad attitude, his wheelchair-dependent mother, her pot-smoking Filipino nursemaid, her Yorkie Terrier, and about 12 cases of wine in this big ramp van, and they head from L.A. to Oregon en route to Wisconsin. That's vertical. They don't all make it. But that all started with the screenplay The Road Back, which I wrote in 1993. So with that, it's a long journey to this. We're talking 18 years, really, because there are, in that screenplay, Thitia, which was never made, there are things in that script that are in vertical. I mean, they're a little bit different, but there are things in there. So I didn't mean to be such a Byzantine, convoluted answer, but that is the answer to where vertical is. It was a long journey to that. I'm not sure I'll write another novel ever again. They're too hard.
No, why?
The other day I thought if I did write a third part to Sideways, and there are a lot of people like it, well, Vertical is a very long novel. It's 150,000 words, and the people reading it are really loving it. But gosh, 150,000 word novels are so long today. We don't read like we used to 20 years ago. But I thought maybe the third one would be like a graphic novel. I'm thinking about it, Thitia. Yeah, and I guess now they, like with iPads, they're finding ways to animate the graphic novel. So I have Miles. Well, I love dialogue, Thitia, and graphic novels are pretty much all dialogue. So it'd be kind of fun to tell a novel in dialogue. I know this sounds blasphemous to your literary audience, but I honestly, I'm afraid that I'm being serious now, that people just aren't reading. Like, they're just so inundated with content from the internet that to sit down with The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky or Haruki Murakami's masterwork that just came out in 1984. It's 980 pages. I mean, when I was 20 years old, that would have been nothing. I would have read that in 1 week. But there was no internet, no cable TV, no smartphones. Who has time to read a 900? And you can't just read 5 pages and check email. You have to read 100 pages every day to stay in that guy. I don't know. I fear for the future of literary fiction, to be honest with you. But so we'll see what it is. But that's why, we're talking about dialogue. I'm so excited about the Sideways play, because it's what we're hoping to do. Well, the play is definitely going to open in April. I've already got the director. I've done 3 drafts of the script. That's been fun. But we're hoping to do a live web stream, kind of like we're doing right now, but really professionally done with 8 cameras and whatever, so that for $4.99, if you're sitting in Ireland or wherever in China, you can watch a live webcast of the play. I'm very excited about the play. What's funny is I'm not just doing it because there's no money in it. It really works. The characters, people love the characters, and the play is based on the novel, not the movie, so I'm able to have a lot of scenes really play out in ways. I don't know, at first when they approached me about it, the Ruskin Group Theater, I thought, I don't know about this, but the more I started to think about it, the more I got really excited about it, and the fan base is so huge. And then I thought, well, how are we going to get them all into this little equity waiver theater, and we can go from city to city, and whatever, but no, a live web stream.
And of course I will be there watching it. Listen, Rex, in a tweet you have said, "I'm in a writing mode today. Once I start, I can stop. It's like putting my inner tube in a spring creek. Joyous moment for a writer." Could you share this with us? How is that kind of feeling while writing?
Well, I wrote that specifically referring to Sideways. There have been a couple of other times when I felt that. For me, when I write, Thitia, there are a lot of writers, they write their 5 pages a day or their 500 words, and they just grind it out whether they have it or not. And that's how they operate. That's how they work. I don't work that way. For me, I let an idea build up and build up and build up. I mean, I usually am writing pretty much every day. And there's a certain point where it just goes. And it really is like a dam breaking, and just a rushing spring stream, and you're in that stream, and although you're only actually physically writing 3 to 4 hours a day, you're in that stream the entire 24 hours. I mean, when I wrote Sideways, once I'd written the short story that became the prologue to the then novel of the screenplay that didn't work, and I suddenly saw the whole thing in my head. I didn't see exactly where they were going to go. I didn't see that, but I knew they were going to get to that wedding somehow. I couldn't wait to wake up, and the quotidian world of paying bills and noises and all your other anxieties and work. I mean, honestly, it's like a great, anti-anxiety medication. You're just in that moment, and it's only happened to me about 3 or 4 times in my life. It's really writing itself. I only have to turn on the computer at that point. Really, it's not hard work. The hard work is going back and facing it. And the hardest thing, and I tweet about this, the hardest thing is taking your work to the world. That's the hardest thing. But when you're in that moment and you're writing, it is just, and you know it's working, and the story is just living, and the characters are living and speaking in your head. It's just, that's the greatest place for a writer to be. You can't just sit around and wait for it for years. You got to write and write. But there'll come a moment for real writers, and there are a lot of them out there, when it just clicks. Something will click, and then you just go. And that's a great place to be. And then you go out there and you think, God, I've created something great, and everyone tells you it's a total piece of shit.
Well, that must be very hard to face. You need all your confidence there.
But there's a good point. I don't mean to be facetious there. There's a point, though, is when you are in that place, you really do have to banish self-doubt. Because if you think that somebody think that this is going to be terrible and they're not going to like it, like my ex-wife did, if you think about that, then it's almost like somebody just closed the dam, the water stopped, and that was it. You have to completely let yourself go, take risk, and just not listen to anything. I didn't even want to talk to people in that place. I didn't want, of course, at that time, no one wanted to talk to me. My phone never rang, so it was no big deal. It was pretty easy. But I don't even want to even hear or see or think things. I almost don't even want to look at movies or anything. When I'm in that place, I just want to be in that place, and then afterward, okay, fine, I got to go to the world with it. It's kind of like, having a child, I guess. I mean, I don't have kids, but imagine everyone who has kids, I always get this, oh, isn't he so cute? Isn't he beautiful? Whatever. Well, not everyone turns out to be so beautiful. I hate to say it, So, but you think that because the moment was so joyous, I don't know.
Yeah, of course. And listen, how much writing has been helping you to find yourself again when you were feeling lost in certain moments? How is to be in that supernal work for you?
Well, that's a pretty deep question. For me, for a lot of people, I guess writing is therapy. They journal or whatever. I can't honestly say it is, but in some ways it is. I grew up in Southern California, in San Diego, in a subdivision. It was very alienating, all very middle class. All of my friends were basically drug addicts. Half of them are dead, or surfers, or just losers, or slackers, or whatever. My mother was a very cold woman, and this is very much in vertical. A dutiful mother, but very cold. And I think age 18, when I started reading, something hit me. I needed to find some form of expression. I don't know where it came from, but I just needed it so badly because I thought I was going to go mad. So for me, writing, it's helped me go mad, but I think it helps keep me from going mad in some ways because it's a mirror to my soul. And and a lot of people don't want to put a mirror up to their soul, and I understand that, but I needed to put a mirror up to my soul, and that's kept me reasonably sane, I think. Otherwise, because I don't really think that nothing else really interested me in life. I mean, I'm interested in literature and film, and I wanted to be a filmmaker. But that's all part of the same thing to me. Being a doctor or a lawyer or something, that never, I'd be miserable. So writing became for me a way to explore myself, I guess, and hopefully deliver it over in a way that was relatable to other people. And I think it took me a long time to achieve that. And I thought I had it with The Road Back, but it never got made. But it wasn't finally until Sideways where it really I mean, the way that people related to Miles or Jack, and there are a lot of women who relate to Virginia Madsen, the Maya character too, so, that's really rewarding, that I went somewhere and worked really hard and delivered something that was so relatable to so many people and also made them laugh. I like making people laugh. That's my joy in life.
Which authors have been influencing or inspiring you?
Oh my gosh, I don't know where to begin. Well, I can tell you a couple here. I used to when I discovered reading, which was later, which a little bit later for me, it was around age 17, 18, somewhere in there. I would read everything that author wrote. So I read Sons and Lovers, D.H. Lawrence's, actually technically his second, and so I had to read everything D.H. Lawrence wrote, everything, even his poetry and his lousy plays. I wanted to know the whole author's journey. But for me, I went to the university, a very fine school, but I felt kind of like unsure of myself and kind of lost. I dropped out for 2 quarters. We were on the quarter system. And with some money I got from other things, I bought the entire collected works of Carl Jung, all 20 volumes, and they're black. They're big black volumes, all 20 volumes. I don't know why I did. I just wanted to immerse myself in one of the great minds of the 20th century. And it took me 6 months reading 5 hours every day to finish those 20 volumes. 6 months. I mean, it's deep, deep stuff. Jung, of course, wrote so much about the hero's journey and a lot of stuff that we get from Joseph Campbell and screenwriting gurus now, whatever. But I read the original guy who created the whole depth psychology of archetypal and blah, 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 and anima, shadow, and all that stuff. But it just was a great journey for me, and I think it really laid the foundation for me as a writer. Jung works so much with, you're paying attention to your unconscious, looking inside, looking at your soul, a word he uses a lot, the word anima and means soul, all those things. It just rams, and then I read other books and stuff. I went back to my university, and I just was a different person. And it's made all the difference in my writing. All my writing are journeys, very much with what Jung believed that the psyche was taking you on, whether you wanted to take the journey or not. And so many, but I don't think about it. I don't think about it when I'm writing. It's just there. And his one quick thing, volume 6 was called Psychological Types, and it's all about introversion, extroversion, feeling, thinking, different functions. And that really forms the characters of Miles and Jack. Miles is clearly an introverted thinking type and an extroverted feeling type, in my opinion. And now you have great conflict with those two kind of characters. And Jung wrote extensively about that. And I don't know. It was that author. Then many authors. I mean, Arthur Rimbaud's A Season in Hell. I mean, that poem. I remember reading Beckett when I was young, or obscure authors like Peter Handke, the great Austrian novelist and playwright, Jack Kerouac, The Beats, Allen Ginsberg. Many. I just read so much. Even Henry Miller, had a lot. I went through a whole period of reading just nothing but women authors. Anna Eastman's diaries, which now, unfortunately, of course, have been, we find out they were heavily boulderized and whatever. But they meant a lot to me. They really gave me an insight into women. So many authors, but that 6 months and more that I spent with Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychiatrist, probably had the most profound influence on me.
I see.
And also one other thing, when I went to UCSD, we had a film teacher there named Manny Farber. He died a year ago at age 90. He's a famous painter, and he was showing incredible films, and at a very young age. I'd say Manny Farber and C.G. Jung had the greatest influence over me. Manny Farber's film class at UCSD, because we could have had a film professor back then who just showed Orson Welles and John Hawkes and whatever, and they're great Howard Hawks, I'm sorry. They're great filmmakers, but he was showing Buñuel and Mitsuguchi and saying that art was risk-taking and whatever. Those two people had the greatest influence on me.
Yeah, I understand what you mean.
But I had to escape the avant-garde, see, because I was enamored of it, but it wasn't authentic. It was not only was it inauthentic, but as we got into the 80s, that kind of writing, like say Elaine Robbe-Grillet, who people forget he wrote this kind of postmodernist novel, these novels with almost no characters in them. He was a best-selling author in the 60s. Le Voyeur, my French is terrible. I don't think I could read him now, and I don't think anyone else can. I mean, the hardest thing for me, Thitia, was learning to write stories and characters. That was the hardest thing. And making it real and making it believable.
What is your favorite quote of all times?
But you know what? The epigraph to Vertical is from Raymond Chandler, one of my favorite writers of all time, and it's from The Long Goodbye, which is his masterpiece. And he's talking about a hangover, but you wouldn't know it from the quote. But it means something more subtextually, and it's, I got up on my feet, and it took character, it took willpower, much despair. And that's how Miles feels in Vertical. And I love that quote. I love it. I love Chandler. I just think he's one of the greatest. In fact, I read The Long Goodbye about every 2 years. I've read it about 8 times just to remind myself, how crappy of a writer I am. I'm serious. I'm serious. He set the bar pretty high there, And I don't mean just as a mystery writer, but just the way he crafts a sentence is just, I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah, there is always somebody that we admire in particular, and we try to chase that kind of standard.
Well, the funny thing, even if you reach the point where, like, maybe you got as, I'm not saying I'd ever get as good as Raymond Chandler, but you reach it, then there's another bar. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? We can only get so high, but there's always somebody higher than us, right?
But maybe sometimes you have to keep challenging and challenging yourself in order to achieve more.
Well, and that's a really good point, Thitia, and let's expand on that just for 1 second, which is you should always, you should always want the best from yourself, and you should really want to push yourself. When I was writing Sideways at night, I would read Ross MacDonald, who's also a great mystery writer, different than Chandler. I like Chandler better than Ross MacDonald, and I didn't even care about the stories or plots. I wasn't interested in them. I'd read about 10 pages just because there was just something so clear about his prose. I wanted just to have that feeling when I woke up in the morning. You know what I mean? So I always kind of aspire to certain things, and I know I'm never going to get there, but it shouldn't. Never think you're that good. I think that would be my advice, because that will make you better. If you just don't, if you realize there are people out there who just are way better than you, and you know what, as a writer, you only have to go, I don't know, pick up Jane Austen or Joseph Conrad, and you'll see really quickly you're not that good of a writer.
Which chances there are for Vertical to become a movie?
Well, next to the Merlot question, this is now the number 1 question. And, again, I don't mean to refer people to stage32.com, but the postscript that I wrote goes into fairly at length, where it's at. Alexander Payne has read the novel. He said, he loves the novel, whether he does or not. He doesn't want to do a sequel. There's a huge fan base. I could go on and on about this question. I mean, take a terrible movie like Sex and the City. They did a sequel that was even, if you can imagine it, worse. I mean, they don't care. It's all about money. I mean, a Sideways sequel, there would be, if Alexander Payne wanted to be jubilation at Fox, there would be jubilation among other people. But it comes down to him. And this is where it gets tricky. Fox Searchlight owns the rights to Miles and Jack in Vertical, the film rights. They own the film rights. But they so revere Alexander, and he has a new film out, The Descendants, which is a Fox Searchlight film, they won't do anything without him. Alexander has a very kind of, proprietary thing towards Sideways. It was his greatest success, and I just don't know if he wants to go back to the well, So we're saying, the producer and I've already done the screenplay adaptation. We're saying don't. Let somebody else direct it. Well, he doesn't want to do that either. He doesn't want it taken away from him. So it's kind of a catch-22 there, Thitia. And it's more complicated than that too, because, and I will go this far. Sideways was a very personal book. Okay, as I said in the early part of this interview, Alexander took my book into his soul and made it a movie. It became personal to him, but it's still Rex Pickett Miles. There's no getting around that fact. To go back to Vertical, he's going back to Miles Rex Pickett again. Is it like he has to go back to the well? Is it really more me? Because you see, when Sideways came out, all the plaudits and all the praise and everything really went to Alexander, to his co-screenwriter, to all the actors. No one really knew who I was. There was no marketing, no publicity. I just kind of was caught up in the partying, basically. And I'm not that kind of a guy. I'm not self-aggrandizing. The producer went on saying stuff that he never should have said and whatever. And they sort of forgot me. But if they do Vertical, that's not going to happen. Not only because I'm much smarter and wiser, but also because I think critics would say, wait a second, this is Miles again. Who is Miles really? And then we'll quickly find out, as you have in Stage 32, that it wasn't the Immaculate Conception, Sideways, or Vertical. There is a guy behind it, and you're talking to him right now. I mean, I am the soul of Sideways, and I am the soul of Vertical, and I don't mean to be arrogant about that, because I live a very modest life. I mean, shockingly. I'm not on the beach here in Malibu, I'll tell you that right now. But, and I don't know if Alexander, I think he has his own journey to take, Thitia. And I'm not sure he wants to take my journey. And so we're saying, okay, fine, but don't stop it. But from a financial standpoint, Thitia, I mean, Sideways did $350 million that's in 2004, 2005. Bear in mind, ticket prices have gone up. The fan base is so huge, and so many people love that movie. Even if it's not a great movie, it's still going to make a lot of money, and everybody knows that. And you know what? It's not over yet. Just because he said he wasn't going to do it doesn't mean I won't. The phone could ring right now and says, Alexander wants to do it, or Alexander has given his approval. But the key here is it comes down to one person, Alexander Payne. If he puts his imprimatur on it as a producer or a director, it gets made. This is an automatic green light, to use our Hollywood term. And green light is the holy grail. It's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow in Hollywood. Green light. And he has the sole power to make that happen. And he knows it.
So what can we do about it?
I'll tell you what we're going to do, Thitia, is this is funny because I just got on Twitter and I'm having a lot of success on Twitter, and I love it, and I love giving back. I have to admit, that is a real joy for me, is to talk about my writing life and just inspire people, So Rupert Murdoch just got on Twitter a week ago. You probably read this. Now, the reason he got on Twitter is, don't think he's just suddenly become a guy. He got on Twitter because he wants to put a human face to News Corp. Well, as you know, Rupert Murdoch owns 20th Century Fox, which is Fox Searchlight. He owns them. He writes their checks. He writes my checks. Rupert Murdoch. I hate to say it, but he does. Oh, I mean, back then, when I was doing Fox. So I'm thinking he's at Rupert Murdoch. We should have a campaign. Just start writing them. When's the Sideways sequel coming, Vertical, Rupert? And by the way, his wife, Wendy Dang, she's a film producer. She produced the Fox Searchlight film. It was a complete bomb, Thitia. It grossed like $2 million. You should write into Rupert Murdoch. What's the deal? You're gonna let one guy in his fancy sense of his self-worth block this film? Come on, you're leaving $500 million on the table. I'm not joking. I'm about ready to...
No, listen, I'm serious. I'm going to support this.
I am. I'm serious. I have nothing to lose. Alexander Payne said he's passed. He's read the novel. He will not read the screenplay. He said he's passed on a film, and no one else will do anything. They're too afraid of him at Fox Searchlight. Well, I don't think Rupert Murdoch's afraid of anybody. He owns the company. He writes Alexander Payne's checks. I mean, if he called over at Fox Searchlight to Nancy Utley and Steve Julia, they're the co-presidents, and said, "What is the deal? I heard there's a sequel to Sideways. Why isn't it in production?" Trust me, it will make some people pretty nervous real fast. I'm not joking here. So at Rupert Murdoch, we got to have a write-in. We got to hammer him on Twitter.
So we're saying this here, so it has to be
I'm not joking. I'm thinking of it. Hi, Rupert. Rex Pickett here. Why are you leaving $500 million on the table? Just wondering. That would just be number one. But you got to hit him every day, right?
So listen, Rex, you're looking at me. I'm serious. I'm going to support this.
Okay, good. All right. And by the way, you put a better face on the campaign than me. So, oh, but honestly, I honestly think that, I mean, I'm not even sure. Not that Rupert knows what's happening at Fox, but Fox, there's Fox, 20th Century Fox, and they own Fox Searchlight. Fox Searchlight is aware that there is a sequel novel, but they are in such reverence and awe to Alexander that they just won't do anything. If he says he doesn't want to do anything, he won't do anything. But if you went up one level to 20th Century Fox, which is basically Jim Giannopoulos and Tom Rothman, there might be singing a different tune. And then if you went up to Rupert Murdoch and he said, hey, what's the deal? Because I don't want people to think I'm boastful here. This is the number one question I get asked. Everyone knows that a Sideways sequel, which now exists, and which is not just some lame rehash like The Hangover Part 2, which, by the way, made more money than the first one. And we know that Hollywood is nothing but sequels or whatever. This takes the characters to another level. We know there's a lot of money on the table. And in Hollywood, at the end of the day, it's really about money. For me, it's really about the story and about the journey. So in that sense, it's self-serving. But gosh, you'd think somebody'd say a Sideways sequel. This is a natural. People want to see those characters again. They've lived on. But right now, where it stands, I'm repeating myself, if Alexander Payne doesn't want to do it, there's no sequel. But I don't think if it goes higher up that he's going to be able to hold the fort for very long. Let's start that campaign. I'm very serious about this.
So that's a deal. We're starting.
All right. And I'll give you 5%, Thitia, if you're the one who made it.
Thank you.
You deserve it. All right, we're starting. Okay, I'm going to hold you to this. Oops. All right.
You have been an accomplished golfer. Tell us more about your passion for golf, how much it has meant in your life.
I played golf when I was young as a kid, and I got very good, but I quit at age 14, and I didn't pick up a club for 15 years, and I could have gone to the professional tour. Who knows what I would have been, but I people and was better than them who went on to become really great golfers. And I love golf. I have a real passion for it. I've written about it. I watch way too much golf. In fact, I got to turn some golf on here in a minute from Hawaii. But I'm enjoying my interview with you. You're actually one of the better interviewers I've ever had. I'm serious. You ask really good questions, and they often lead to really terrific answers. When my second feature film bombed, I got back into golf because golf is a very relaxing, meditative thing. Now, for a lot of people, it's not relaxing, I realize. And I went up to this beautiful course, La Purisima, which was the mystery novel we were talking about. And it's beautiful. There's no homes on it. And in midweek, there's nobody on it. You have it all to yourself. This is the golfer's dream, my golfer's dream. I prefer to play by myself, ultimately. Or just like with one woman. Actually, if I could find a really good woman golfer, it shouldn't even have to be that good. Reasonably good. Just the two of us all alone on a course, that would be my dream. But golfing was very relaxing. I found, kind of we were talking about writing that stream that you're in and you just forget about the quotidian world. I feel the same way when I play golf for 4 hours, which is about how long it takes to play around, out in this beautiful place with hawks circling. It relaxes me. It's my yoga in a way. And then that led to La Purisima because the two main characters meet on a golf course, because golf courses can be low common denominators. You can have nothing in common with someone. You can be totally left as I am and politically and meet some right winger, but you come together over golf in a way. I mean, it's weird, but it happens. And then, golf becomes kind of a metaphor for things too, in a way. So yeah, golf has meant a lot to me in terms of my writing. I don't play as much today because I'm so busy, and to play at a skill level I'd like to play at just takes too much hard work and time. I just don't have it. So I probably watch more golf than play it today. But and hearing back then, I had to go 2.5 hours north to play this golf course, which was a beautiful course, but it's in an uncrowded area, and that's a long story. Now I get to Pebble Beach. I was writing for Travel and Leisure Golf magazine. They wanted to fly me to Ireland and UK, and the editor said to me, the editor-in-chief, if you haven't played golf in the UK, Rex, you're not a real golfer. And I said, and I know. You have the greatest golf course. I watch the British Open every year. I watch every hour of it on television. I'm up at 4 a.m. Trust me, I know a lot more than golfers a lot, and I used good. I mean, I got back to being a one handicap, kind of a scratch handicap, and I started playing some tournaments and things like that. I love the competition, but I also just love the freedom of it. And you guys got the most beautiful courses in the world. I mean, all those courses, they were built so long ago. You didn't use earth movers. They're so natural.
You're currently writing a series for HBO. Could you tell us something about it?
Uh-huh. Well, I signed with some new agents about 2 years ago, and they said, I said I'm not sure I would write another novel because it's very hard work to write a novel, and I just don't know if people are really reading like they are today. I think there's more people writing novels than are reading them today, if you want my opinion. So they said you should write TV, and of course cable really lends itself more to my kind of R-rated sensibility, this kind of honest, slightly transgressive, whatever it is, and like HBO or whatever. So I wrote a treatment, which is just basically an outline about a famous wine critic, loosely based on a famous wine critic, all set in Napa, Sonoma, but he has social anxiety disorder so badly that he has to have a psychiatric service dog. So that's the comedy part, but it really takes you into the wine world. But it's in development. We'll see if it goes. They have many things in development. It's been fun, but it's also been kind of it's not the kind of writing I like to do where you write outlines and outlines and more outlines. I prefer the real deal, So the reason I like the Sideways play so much, and I'm so excited about it, is because there's going to be a play. There's going to be a premiere. In fact, April 19th, there will be a play, for good or ill, and it's going to be rockin' funny. I love the reason I made independent films, Thitia, is I didn't want to just be writing scripts and hope that somebody would make my script or whatever. I wanted to go over to Eastman Kodak in Hollywood and buy raw stock and put it in the camera, because no matter how good or bad it was going to be, there would be a finished product. I hate development. I hate screenplays. They're just nothing but blueprints for movies, if they get made. In fact, one of the reasons I started writing novels is that I said, if I don't get it published, at least it will be a thing finished in and of itself. It's a novel. Obviously it's nice if it gets published, but a screenplay isn't even a novel unless it's made into a film. You know what I mean? So I like the end result. So yeah, but the good news is it is a deal with HBO, and the company Leverage Management behind the hit show Entourage, which, finished its 8th season and is now finished, and the new Boardwalk Empire, which has won many Emmys. So I've got a very powerful entity behind me, but I got to listen to a lot of people too. So it's, if it goes, it'll be really fun because it'll all be shot in the wine country of Napa, Sonoma. And, we'll see.
Which is the difference between writing for film, theater, or a novel?
Well, it's a great question for me because my novel, as I said earlier, the rap on it from the publishing industry, who hated it, was that it read too much like a screenplay. In fact, my agent once said to me on one of our many rejection letters, he said, Rex, they think it reads too much like a screenplay. And you know what? In New York here, which is where the publishing industry is, we hate screenwriters. That's what he told me. We think they make too much money and they don't have any integrity. I said, well, okay, great. I think I fall somewhere in between. I will say this, Thitia, I don't write novels to win Pulitzer Prize or to win Man Booker Prize, although actually I'm not qualified for the Man Booker because I'm American. But, I don't do that. I don't spend all day like some writers, and I'm not going to name their names, who they'll spend all day crafting one paragraph. I don't care. I write novels that are going to be movies. And the part of the reason is because I made movies. I started with movies, although I'm very much into literature. There's no question about it. And I've written many screenplays. So I have a very visual imagination. Now, to answer your question, I'm getting back to it, is a screenplay is dialogue driven for the most part. A play is really dialogue driven. That's my strong suit, is dialogue. I think, whether I'm, in terms of like crafting a beautiful paragraph that reads like, I don't know, Michael Ondaatje or something. That's not my goal. As much as I admire those writers, that's not my goal. So theater, what's wonderful, we've gone back to the novel, and I thought, okay, how am I going to adapt this or whatever? it was easy. I wrote the first draft in 2.5 weeks. We did a cold read. I got notes from the theater people. I wrote the next draft in like 1 week. And, and a lot of it would have to do with stage, like, okay, Rex, we can't go from this location to this location. But my film experience really has brought a lot to bear on the play, because the play, although it's constrained and it's on one location, and well, you have 3 or 4 locations in one location, and I do have to deal with scene changes and stuff. But the great thing about a play is that you want scenes to run longer. In a film, a 3-minute scene is a long scene in a movie. It really is. But in a play, you want it to go 10 minutes. Well, this is a blessing to me, because a 10-minute scene, I can let my dialogue really rip. Whereas when you adapt a novel like Sideways, one of the challenges that Alexander and Jim faced was what dialogue they were going to take, because he told me, Alexander said, so much of this stuff is so good, it takes so much for an hour and 50-minute movie. You know what I mean? And you have other visual things. In a play, I can use much more of it. So it's been a liberating experience. Liberating, to see it. In fact, in some ways, the play might be more funny than the movie, because these guys really are able to really riff on each other, which they do in the novel. And I think the other reason is Miles in the movie, he's a little more dyspeptic than he is in the novel. He's more of a kind of a growly kind of guy. You laugh at him, you laugh at some of the situations he's in, but you rarely laugh at anything he says. But in the novel, you laugh at things Miles says. He's a funny guy. He says off the wall stuff, You actually laugh at things he says, and so it's been one of the great joys. And I'll tell you, I'm not somebody who says something is a great joy. I mean, mostly I complain about stuff, but and it's funny. And also bear in mind too, the playwright, unlike the screenwriter, has total control in theater. In other words, there is no screenwriter who's ever been allowed to choose their director of that screen. Forget that. You don't even try. And then you're lucky if you're even invited to the set. And God forbid you wrote a novel that was adapted by other people. Now they even forget you even exist. Seriously, that happened. With a play, it's like, no, they want me in the theater. I have final casting. I interviewed the directors, Thitia, and in the Ruskin Group Theater, where it's going to be done here in Santa Monica, but everyone will get to see it because we're going to do the live web stream. The Ruskin Group Theater, they sent me directors, award-winning guys, and they were all over 50 or 60, and I just didn't like them. They were all trying to tell me what to do and whatever. And so I interviewed this relatively young woman, 29. She's only directed one play. She comes from a background of theater, and she was just mind-blowing. So I chose a 29-year-old woman to direct the Sideways play. A lot of people, they really criticized, not Ruskin Group Theater. They loved the choice. They loved it. But some of her peers and stuff said, you should have a 50 or 40-year-old guy do this or whatever. She's really brought a wonderful element to it. We go into casting next month. I'm very excited. And there's a lot of name actors who are throwing their hats in the ring. It's kind of exciting, See, we are in Hollywood here, It is.
How did the project and the idea of Sideways as a theater play start?
Well, it's kind of a long story, but I'll try to abbreviate it. When Vertical first came out about last March or something, I was doing a big book signing right next to the Santa Monica airport, which is a private airport. And there was a big hangar there. It was called Pinot Days, and I'm signing books. And the Ruskin Group Theater is right next to the Santa Monica airport. And there was a guy there. He came over, and he works kind of with the Ruskin Group Theater. And some people had approached me about doing the musical of Sideways, and I don't know and I kind of was just joking to him. Yeah, people mentioned it. He said, well, how about the play? And I said, well, and his name's Jason Matthews. And I said, Jason, I don't know, whatever. He said, well, let's talk about it. So we had coffee, and I thought, if this guy says one wrong thing, I'm out of here. Because so many people want so many things from me, whatever. It's just ridiculous. But he was so smart. He had actually read the novel. He knew it intimately. He said, this is how I see the play. It should be based on your novel. We don't want it to be a great. And I suddenly found, then I met the theater director, John Ruskin, this other guy, Mike Myers, who's he's the stage manager guy. They're so smart. They're so into it for the passion and the love of it. That won me over, Thitia. It reminds me of like independent cinema. You don't do it for the money. You do it for the love. These guys work so hard, and they have so much integrity, and yeah, they know what they're sitting on. I mean, normally their plays run Friday through Sunday. Sideways will run Wednesday through Sunday. Normally their plays go 8 weeks. Sideways is guaranteed 12 weeks. I mean, they know it's going to be a hit because it's a small theater. It only holds like 50, 60 people, you know. But with the live web stream, we can go out with it. I just like the people. They've been great. It's like dealing with people, you know, when you write screenplays and you hear all kinds of really stupid, you know, and they haven't. I don't know. I really like everybody involved, and they love the director I hired, and I like her energy, and she's brought a kind of a feminine touch to this. It's a guy's play, and she's bringing kind of a touch to it. So and also the fact that so that's how it came to me. A guy met me at a wine tasting next door to the theater. I never in a million years, Thitia, would have thought, and I'm coming to a point here. I never would have thought, oh, I should approach a theater and say, would you like to do the Sideways play? Or I think one day I'll just write the Sideways play and take it out there and see if I can get somebody to do it. It came to me. So, you know, you kind of got to put yourself out there. You wouldn't believe the things that have come to me over Twitter. I mean, we met on Twitter or Facebook. Otherwise we wouldn't be talking. Yeah, we met on Twitter, you know, and I wasn't even going to do Twitter. I thought it was a joke, you know, and now I got all kinds of people meeting me. A guy just invited me to Monterrey, Mexico to do a 3-day book signing wine tasting on Twitter, you know. So, you know, in a way, you have to kind of put yourself out there. You know, you can't just stay. I say to writers, yeah, you have to be kind of introverted to be a writer in some ways, but you also have to kind of be social. And I'm not the most social person in the world. I may sound really gregarious to you, but I'm really not. So it was really just putting myself out there, and a guy approached me and listening to him, and then I really liked what he said, and I said, okay, let me take a stab at it. And I did a first draft. We did a cold read of the play, just actors sitting in chairs with a script in their hand. And I thought, if this doesn't work, and I'm very critical of my own stuff, it's dialogue, but there were about 8 of us in the theater. Everyone was laughing. You know, it was pretty funny. I mean, it was rough around the edges, and they were timing it, and you know, and this and that. But I thought, wow, if it's this funny in a cold read, what's it going to be like when actors are off book in costume? We got lights and music, and we're going to use not rear screen projection, but where you project ground stuff when they're driving in a car. That takes me kind of back to my movie days, because, you know, look, let's face it, movies and theater have more in common than movies than novels. In this way, is that you're dealing with actors, and you're dealing a great deal with dialogue, and you're dealing with setting. It's much more constrained in a theater, no question about it. And you don't have the liberal use of cutting and music as you do in movies, but they're very close. So in a way, this is like taking me back to my indie filmmaking days.
And Rex, how can the people contact you on Twitter?
Well, I'm at Rex Pickett, 2 T's. It's real simple. And you know what's funny is I get a notification of every one of the people who follow me in my email, and I look at every single one of them, you know, and sometimes if they want to reply, or I'll reply to them in Twitter. I mean, it's possible it's going to get so big I might have to deselect that, but for right now, I do. So at Rex Pickett, and I hope you follow me, because I write a lot of funny stuff in the evening, and also a lot of good writing tips, I'm told. So.
Listen, Rex, thank you so much for joining our show. It was really a pleasure to talk about you and your works, and I really look forward to see Sideways in theater very soon.
All right. Thank you, Thitia. It's always a pleasure with you.